Today we are going to work on this beginner-friendly improv piecing project. So grab some string scraps, which are long, narrow scraps, and let's get started. So this past week I had this urge for simple piecing. You know how sometimes you don't want to deal with points and you don't want to deal with precise cutting. You just want to take some fabric and sew it together. So this is what I made. I grabbed my bags of solid strings. I had a great big bag of grays from the backgrounds of a lot of gray quilts I've made recently, and I also grabbed a bag of aqua, and I decided I was just gonna piece them together into blocks and make an easy quilt. So this is like a roughly 60 by 60 quilt, but you could make as many or as few blocks as you wanted. I stopped here because I think I might hand quilt it and I didn't really want it to get any bigger, but you could make a baby or you could make a king size quilt. So there is a little cheat sheet, easy to follow PDF pattern for this in the description below. You just need to click on the little link right here, and you can have it by your side while you are working on your quilt. So let's jump into piecing the block, since there is no preparation for this. So let's make some scrappy strip blocks. I have my stack of gray strings here, and I've actually pre-cut them all to about 11 to 12 inches. Obviously, they're all a little bit different. I didn't measure them carefully, but I just wanted them to be a shorter, more workable length so that I wasn't constantly trimming between every little sewing session. So I'm just going to take these strips and I'm going to put the grays in a couple of piles so that I can kind of easily grab one that doesn't match the strip that I used before. So I'm going to grab two and sew them together along the long edge. Now, as with most improv piecing, I am not going to use my little seam guide here because my strips are not cut perfectly even. So I'm going to align them as best as I can, but I'm going to take kind of a generous seam allowance here so that I'm sure to catch all of the little slightly wobbly edges. So I'm just going to sew straight, but not right 1/4 of an inch at the edge. So I have these two strips sewn together, and we're just going to repeat that process until we have a block that's about a little over 10 inches long. And I just move these to the side a little bit so that I have access to my mat. So my mat here is about 11 inches wide. So I will just be kind of periodically holding this up to my mat and making sure that it meets that minimum 10 inches so that we can trim this down to a 10-inch block. So I have been following the pattern of including one of my accent colors in each block, and I've been varying where I put it. So why don't I just stick it in now? And you can see right here, like, this is not a very straight edge to this. So that's why I'm taking generous seam allowances. And it's an improv piece. This is a low stress sewing. Just go with it and it'll be fine. So that's 3 strips. And now I'm just going to continue to piece in my kind of background strips all the way to the end. So when I'm measuring this to see if it is wide enough this way, I'm not pulling it tight, but I am pulling it so that it's flat, because if I just kind of lay it down here, the seam allowances kind of shrink the fabric in a lot, and I don't want to sew on unnecessary strips. So I am just kind of pulling it just so the strips are flat And now this is coming in at about 10.5. So this one is good to go. So now that this block is measuring over 10 inches, it's ready to press and trim down to 10 inches. But I'm going to batch sew these. So I'm going to make a bunch of blocks, maybe even all of the blocks just like this, so that I can press and trim all in one go, just to kind of save myself some time. So now I'm ready to make my next block. I have 2 pieces here. Let's sew them together. And I'll just keep repeating this process until I have as many blocks as I want for my quilt. We'll be trimming these down to 10 inches, which means that they'll be 9.5 inches finished in your quilt. So you can just kind of think of how many blocks you want. I will put a chart in the download to give you some ideas of like potential sizes and layouts, but I'm shooting for, I think, a 7x7 layout, which will give me a nice square quilt. I love square quilts. So I'm going to make a bunch more of these, and then we will talk about trimming. I have been working away, and I have a stack of pressed blocks, and I've already trimmed some of them. So I'm using a 12-inch, 12.5-inch square ruler to trim my blocks, just for ease. But if you have a rectangular ruler, you can use the lines on your cutting mat just to kind of square up your blocks. I put some washi tape on my ruler just to help me kind of quickly identify that 10-inch line. And all I'm doing here is I'm using these horizontal lines on the ruler to help me kind of keep my blocks kind of going, the seams in my blocks going fairly parallel. Now you don't have to. You could cut this really wonky so that your blocks were all have like a different style to them. But I'm keeping mine kind of boring and straight and easy here. I want to avoid including any of these selvage dots in my block. So that looks like a good place to cut. I also don't want to cut so that I have a sliver of a string or stripe on either side. Like if I were to cut all the way down here, then once I lose another 1/4 inch to my seam allowance to join these blocks, then that is going to be a pretty small little stripe. So I just kind of center it, make sure I have enough room on either side, and cut around 2 sides. Spin it around, and now I'm lining up that cut edge with that 10-inch line. Now obviously I have chosen 10 inches somewhat arbitrarily. I had a lot of about 11-inch long strings to use up, so that's why I chose that length. If your strings are mostly 12 or 13 inches long, then you could do the same process but with larger blocks. You could be trimming yours down to 12.5 inches. You'll just need to make adjustments. You'll need to add more strings. Like I was shooting for like 10, 10.5, 11 as my width of block. You'll need to shoot for 12.5 or 13. But this is completely customizable to the size of strings that you primarily have. You could also make little tiny bit blocks if you have tiny strings, which I do have quite a few of now after I finished a recent project that left me with little bits left over. And that's it. I'm going to trim all of these, and then we will start laying them out and deciding how I want these to look. But I think I'm going to go with this kind of alternating directional layout. I think that's how this is going to end up. But I have lots more to trim, and then I need to count and make sure that I made enough blocks for my layout, because sometimes I don't count right. But I will join you back when I have all of my blocks done and pressed and trimmed and ready to lay out. So once you have as many blocks as you are happy making, then it is time to assemble your quilt. I laid mine out kind of as I suspected in this kind of alternating layout. And the main reason was, if you do it this way, then all of these seams are gonna come up against a solid piece of fabric. So it's really easy to press these blocks so that there's no bulk. So you would press all of these towards this block and all of these towards this block and so on. You can spin your seams in the center if you like, if you really want to reduce bulk, but it just made it easier than dealing with seams that might be coming together and pressing them open, because this is supposed to be an easy quilt and I didn't want to do that. I'm really happy with it. I love the color scheme. I think that the lots of neutrals play well with just the one single stripe of kind of a brighter color. So this was kind of a record fast quilt for me, and I think it will be for you too. So don't bother kind of pressing between seams, just make those blocks, trim them, and sew them together. It could not be easier. Am I recording? Yes, right? Yes. Here is the full effect of the quilt. I love how this came together, and if you like this construction, then you will also love the video that's popping up right now. It's another improv string pieced quilt that we did in kind of long columns instead of blocks, and it was just as fun as this. And if you've already seen that or you've already made that quilt, then there's another video that's popped up that is another video that YouTube thinks that you will like. So I hope you really enjoyed this video. If you do, please consider subscribing and liking this video. It really helps my channel. And I will see you again next Monday with a brand new video. Happy quilting!